one doesn't work. It doesn't. Oh, this is one that was up here, huh? Oh, okay. I see. One of the things that's happening is I talked about the frenzy that the imperialists are experiencing, and that's true. And there are all kinds of ways that you can see that if you investigate. And part of what you see, of course, happening is throughout Africa, one of the difficulties for the United States in particular, but also for France and the other imperialist powers, China is the fastest growing economic influence on the continent of Africa. And that's extraordinary. And China is really challenging the ability of the United States and much of Europe to continue to dominate in Africa economically. In fact, that's one of the reasons that you saw this thing happening in the Ivory Coast, where they had to get rid of Gbagbo. That's one of the reasons, because it was assumed that Gbagbo was establishing economic relationships with China that would have come at the expense of France in particular. And also Gbagbo was challenging this whole colonial pact that allowed France to take 65% of the foreign reserves from Africa, from all of those African territories. So it's a real challenge to imperialism as it exists today, and there's debate that's happening within the thinking circles, the thinking representatives of imperialism. Some of them have conceded already that the U.S. Is no longer going to be this huge hegemon in the world. They used to talk so much about how the U.S. was the last superpower, etc., and it was going to dominate the world, where increasingly that's something that many of the thinking representatives of the bourgeoisie in this country, including people like Brzezinski. Anybody here familiar with Brzezinski? Well, Brzezinski was James Earl Carter's national security advisor, and he was the one who engineered the war in Afghanistan that led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. He was the one who played a primary role in organizing the modern jihad. He is one of the primary ones that is responsible for the rise of Osama bin Laden and all of those forces that they're fighting today. They created them in order to fight against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And so he is, like I said, one of Obama's closest advisors, even now. When he was running, and even now, he's one of Obama's advisors. And they have concluded that the United States is not going to be this world-dominating force anymore. In fact, you've probably read that within the next 6 years or so, that China will have outgrown the United States as the largest economic force in the world today. So it is a strategy that's promoted by people like Brzezinski, who's tied to Obama, is that says that we concede that the United States is not going to be able to dominate anymore. It's going to have to try to lead from within the pack. And so instead of the United States taking leadership on every question, they want to use entities like NATO. You know what NATO is? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? It was a thing that was formed for the purpose of uniting all of Europe and the United States against what was then the Soviet Union. It's a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But NATO, as you know, is the one that's doing on the cover that they're using to bomb Libya today. Is NATO, right? And so this is to obscure, first of all, U.S. leadership in this attack on Libya, but also because, as I said, there's this huge debate going on within the thinking representatives of white power today about either how the U.S. is going to survive its loss in influence, the loss of hegemony in the world, or how, as some of the so-called neocons would put it, the U.S. is going to take over again. That's the George Bush type, thinking. And when I say George Bush, of course, is their product. They're not a product of George Bush. George Bush is a product of this thought, this group of intellectuals in ruling class circles who have defined how the U.S. can best serve its own interests. And there are some called neoconservatives. That's who George Bush was tied to. And then there are other groups, but one that's tied to people like Brzezinski, who I just mentioned, who suggests that the U.S. is going to have to use forces like the United Nations and NATO and try to use them as means of carrying out its will, as opposed to trying to go it alone, because it's incapable of doing that. Uhuru. Yeah. Oh, you need this, or do you? So we only got one, huh? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and organizer for ALD, like, I guess in the activist circles or whatnot, one of the questions they asked of what, one of the topics today was going to be is if Libya was going to be spoken on, since, that is one of, the biggest things happening in the world today, and how that affects, the African Union and, the role in Africa uniting and what's going on with Libya. And even to bring that closer to, folk in the city, how does that, what's going on in Libya affect, us uniting as African people here in D.C. or in the U.S. or Canada?
I think that the question of Libya is really important, and I think that what we see happening with Libya today is extraordinary testimony to our organizational, political, and ideological weakness. And I speak from the perspective of African People's Socialist Party and anything that in this country that poses as a real revolutionary movement. There should be thousands and thousands of us in the streets protesting what's happening to Libya. I think that it is really deserving of a self-criticism that we do not have that capacity, because that's the only reason we are not there in numbers. I mean, we have been in different places. We were protesting, in some places in this country, small protests, and in the Bahamas, I mean, in fact, one of our forces was actually confronted by the police because the U.S. Embassy protested, the U.S. Embassy protested our demonstrations at the U.S. Embassy in Nassau because of what's happening in Libya. So it is a barbarism at its height. But I'm saying this not as some kind of romantic or some kind of sentimentalist. I do think it's important for Africans to know that Libya is in Africa, that Libya is Africa. And I do think it's important for us to know that when compared to most of the so-called leaders in Africa, Gaddafi has done some really significant things, both in Libya and throughout Africa, in terms of contributions to the African Union. If for what that's worth, Gaddafi is one of the highest contributors. In fact, the $30 million that Obama's talking about, they've frozen in terms of assets and given to the so-called rebels, etc. That was resources that was designated for Africa, for African projects. So that is true. And so we oppose what this regime is doing in Libya. We also oppose what this regime is doing in Syria. And I say this as, again, not some kind of romantic or some kind of sentimentalist, because having said that about Gaddafi, having said that about Libya, I say it because the imperialists are attempting to save their skins. That Libya and Syria, especially with the declining significance or influence or the troubled significance and existence of Egypt, Tunisia, Bahrain, even Saudi Arabia, etc., Iran, Syria, Libya became very problematic for the imperialists. And that this is an attempt to rescue themselves and to try and retain the balance of power that exists in that area. That's why Libya, Syria under attack, and that's why Iran is under attack. So what I'm saying is that we are opposed to what they are trying to do to rescue imperialism. We are opposed to the barbarism that's happening there, and we are opposed to this blatant attack on Africa, an open attack on Africa by imperial white power, because it's the kind of naked precedent that is untenable as far as we as black people are concerned. They are involved in all kinds of war in Africa today, in Ivory Coast, throughout Congo, most places the imperialists are, but there's usually proxy war. This is naked. This is wide open. Even in Somalia, proxy war. Use Ethiopia. Use other proxies to make those wars. But this is blatant. This is white power. These are tomahawks and other kinds of weapons that's directed at Africa. And so that's symbolically significant for us. That's a precedent that we should be up in arms around. Now, having said that, it's not the same thing as an endorsement of the Libyan or Syrian governments, because the truth of the matter is that while it's much better in Libya for the people who live in Libya than for people who live in most of Africa, the truth of the matter is that I didn't know that's what you were doing until now. I didn't know you were a timekeeper, so thank you very much. You got to wave it, let me know it. Is that what we're talking about is Libya is a welfare state. And a welfare state is not socialism. We are socialists. We are socialists. And what is socialism? Socialism is where the workers themselves have come to power, not because of some beneficent brother leader is doling out resources that ought to belong to the people. The working class itself seizes power and then has the ability to determine its own future based on that. So that's first of all. So we support, if there were a revolutionary organization, if there were African internationalists who were really struggling to put the working class in power in Libya, we would be in solidarity with that. But this is something that is opposed to the working class in Libya, in Africa, ever coming to power. This thing that we see that's happening there. So we are in solidarity and support with the Libyan government, with the Libyans against this attack by imperialism, naked, nasty attack by imperialism. And the same thing we would say even about Syria, at this point. The AU, okay, the AU is what it has always been. It's the OAU without the O. And it's simply a grouping of neo-colonial powers, all of which are subject to dictatorship, the dictate of the different imperialist entities out there, France, United States, etc. And increasingly, of course, China is becoming a power there as well. Uhuru. Oh.
This is going to be our last question, by the way.
Uhuru. Just sort of looking at the amount of catastrophe that's happening on a global scale, some of which obviously organized by the ruling class and imperialism, and a lot of which being masqueraded as natural disaster. Like when you look at Haiti, obviously Katrina, even Japan, the tsunami in Southeast Asia, you see people of color dying by the masses, and people hold different beliefs about what actually is causing such natural disasters. I personally believe in the ability to orchestrate earthquakes and other natural disasters. But my question is around preparation for such catastrophes, and the necessity of us as people of color to be able to step outside of capitalism and be sustainable if need be, while capitalism still exists. So things like gardening, like even physical fitness, just preparing for mass fatality. And I wondered if you could give your thoughts about that.
First of all, the catastrophe that the people are suffering from, in Japan even, Haiti in particular, is a catastrophe of imperialism. It is capitalism, a particular social system. It is capitalism that has bled Haiti, bled Haiti, bled Haiti. I was in Oakland, California, where they had an earthquake of just about the same size as the one in Haiti. I think maybe 60 people died in Oakland, if that many, in Oakland. What was the difference? The difference was that resources being stolen from Haiti and other places went to build infrastructure in Oakland, right? And denied our capacity to have that kind of infrastructure and resources in Haiti. That's why people died. It's because Africans don't have a greater inclination to die in Haiti than they do in Oakland. Earthquakes are earthquakes. They're the same, power, force in both places. But one place is benefited, was able to sustain the earthquake more effectively because they had resources that were stolen from the other places and places like that. So that was the difference in Haiti and Oakland as an example. Even the tsunami in Japan. Tsunami was bad. The earthquake, tsunami was bad, but this terrible thing that in its wake. Here you got Japan, the only country that where openly suffered from nuclear attack, and they got all these nuclear reactors all over the damn place. That is the most, insane thing. But why? Capitalism, profit over people. Profit is the most important thing. Japan, just like any place capitalism exists. So they got capitalism there, and that played a major role and continues to play a role, not only for Japan, for everybody right now. We don't even know what's in the milk, what's in the vegetables, even in this country as a consequence of what's going on in Japan today. So that's capitalism has no redeeming values at all, and again, it comes at the expense of us and other peoples around the world. Preparation. I do believe that we need to be, that the solution to all of this is revolution. Revolution, that's what's going to help Haiti. Look at our situation in Haiti today. Today they call it a catastrophe. But Haiti they've been bleeding Haiti since the Haitian Revolution. And Haiti was fine as long as it was feeding white people and white power. But the moment we made that revolution, the whole white world ganged up on Haiti, starved Haiti, put economic quarantine on Haiti, made Haiti pay reparations to France. And all of the imperial powers ganged up on Haiti, and Haiti paid France for almost 100 years of reparations. And then after that, the United States government attacks Haiti, robs it, goes and takes all the gold out of the treasury, the Marines do, and bring that back to this country, etc. They starve Haiti, work the people for nothing, and they maintain this relationship, these structural relationships to imperialism. That's what's bleeding people around the world. Imperialism, capitalism is like a parasite. It is a parasite that requires sucking the blood of the peoples around the world for its own existence. So that's what's happening. But you're right. We have to organize in what we believe in, creating dual and contending power. Even in the process of overturning capitalism, we need to be struggling to put in places things that sustain ourselves, economic and other kinds of things, everything that we can do. Not only just here, but what we do here has to be connected to what's happening in Canada, what's happening in the Bahamas, what's happening in Colombia, what's happening, throughout the continent of Africa. The same thing that Garvey was struggling to do to build this whole economic relationship among ourselves. They call it in our communities today, they call it underground economy. Where you're on a pair of shoes, the brother pulls up in his car, and you buy him out the trunk of the car, and it's sort of off the radar in a certain kind of way. We begin by creating that kind of economic activity among ourselves, revolutionary activity. We have to do it anyway to sustain our revolutionary organizations around the world. We need to be able to do that. So that's just off the top. But I'm going to say this. One of the problems that we have today, right now, as we hold this discussion, is that revolution was defeated in this country and around the world. Revolution was defeated. And there are people who deny that, but all you got to do is look at the difference in what you see right now and what was going on in the 60s, where the Chinese characterized revolution was the main trend in the entire world. Everybody was involved in revolutionary activity, and we were here. And we were defeated. We got wiped out. The government murdered people in their sleeps, like Fred Hampton. They came in, shot up our places. They tore up our survival programs and things like that to destroy revolution. And subsequent to that, we had this false thing that pretended to be revolution. That was not about revolution at all, but they were academics. This passes revolution and preachers protesting this and that, but the revolutionary essence was gone. Not only did it happen here, They stopped the revolution in El Salvador when it was attempting to occur. They frustrated revolutions for a short time all around the world. And so now we can end up coming to meetings where we're talking about very serious issues, but they're simply academic discussions. I'm not interested in a damn academic discussion. If I were, I'd go back to a college campus. I'm interested in revolution because only revolution is going to change the world. But we got a habit now of just having academic discussions. We come, okay, ALD is coming, we put on our Africa stuff, then we go and have the meeting, and then we listen to discussion, and it was good or bad, and then we go back. I'm saying that we have to organize for revolution. Revolution, revolution, revolution. And revolution is not something that happens mysteriously. Human beings have to be involved in the process of making that happen. For revolution to happen, first of all, there must be necessarily an organized, steel cadre of individuals who are committed to making that happen, whose profession is revolution. They may be school teachers, they may be bus drivers, they may be bricklayers and things like that in terms of their occupation, but their profession must be revolution. We must be committed to revolution, to a revolutionary strategy, revolutionary lifestyle in order to make that happen. If you ain't got that, you just got a conversation. My uncle used to say a conversation is the cheapest commodity on the block. Everybody's got one, right? Uhuru.
We do have a little bit of time to work with, and we did have one more question from the crowd. Was the two-pronged question. One, from my understanding, the bourgeoisie right now is even like certain sectors are trying to categorize, oppress, or colonize people as almost like a non-existing segment of the population. And we know that you've been developing a theory around that, explaining that particular question. And also, we know that there's a lot of resistance going on the ground throughout African communities here in the U.S., particularly in the form of the police, the killing of police in our communities. So if you could speak to both of those questions before we wrap it up.
Thank you. I want to speak to a couple of things. One thing I just wanted to comment on, when Mafrika was talking about catastrophe, a lot of what we see happening in the world is not catastrophic for us. It's catastrophic for the bourgeoisie. I understand the world's supposed to end today. Anybody hear that? And what you will find is every time imperialism is in trouble, every time capitalism is in trouble, there's this whole thing that the world is coming to an end. And you're right. Imperialism, that's imperialism anticipating its death and speaking through people who call themselves preachers and other kinds of things, because it's a troubled time. It's a troubled time. That's what slave rebellions are, troubled time. That's what resistance is about, troubled time. That's what we want, isn't it? Troubled time, because to live in peace during slavery is a crime, isn't it? And so we don't want any peace on the damn plantation. Damn right. It's a troubling time. The world is coming to an end as you've known it. Imperialism is going to die, and we are going to kill it, right? We're going to kill it. So what we are looking at is what gives the imperialists some kind of imperialist power, right? Like the attack on Libya. Like Iraq and all these other places where they are fighting for their lives. This is not the imperialism that you used to see like 50 years ago, where imperialism was on the growth. It was capturing everything and taking everything that people had. This is imperialism fighting for its very existence. So it's on the ropes. It's imperialism experiencing death throes. And we have a responsibility to take advantage of this period in time and not to be faked out by what seems to be its power, because it ain't got nothing. The Chinese had it right a long time ago when they said that imperialism is a paper tiger. So, look at what's happening around the world. They can't stop nothing. They might be able to do something to me. Do you understand what I'm saying? They got that kind of nasty. They might even kill Gaddafi. They can stop that kind of stuff temporarily, but there's a trend that's happening in the world that they cannot reverse. The genie is out of the bottle. You can't put it back in. Nobody's going back to those old-timey days when the white people and white world just dominated every damn body. And you're right, resistance is everywhere, and I love it. That's why I'm so opposed to how we treat these young Africans, because young Africans, they don't even have the politic necessarily. But they're in a constant state of resistance. Constant state of resistance, you know. Every time you look up and, you know, and I go to some of these meetings with some of these black nationalists, and they oppose because, you know, they wear their pants down like this, and, you know, and they don't do this and that because they do everything the opposite what white power say do. White power say wear your pants this way, they wear them this way. They wear the shirts inside out. They wear the hats backwards. They just ain't going to do nothing that white power says to do. They just ain't going to do it. And just because you do everything white power say do, you understand, you can't expect them to do it. They just don't know how to resist yet. And if you were in front of the question, they wouldn't be doing that. They'd be resisting the way they need to be resisting, right? They'd be organizing in their communities. They'd be trying to take on imperialism right up as opposed to simply wearing their pants sagging and stuff like that. So don't blame them, blame you. Blame your black ass. You understand? Don't blame them for not knowing how to fight against imperialism in the most effective way. But you some old Uncle Tom saying you got to wear your clothes. What in the hell? That's the biggest problem we got, because young African men wearing their pants sagging. Wow. That's our problem? African young men sagging? That's incredible. Don't you think that's incredible? With all the stuff that's coming down with black people everywhere around the world, that's the problem you find. No. So there is resistance. And not only is it take that role, the problem is that the lack of organizational ideological influence that we have on things in our own communities. Because the other thing that's happening every time you look up is that Africans are killing cops. They ain't killing cops because, you know, they've come to revolutionary conclusions. They're killing cops because I ain't going to go back and do 50 years. They're killing cops because we live under colonial occupation. And colonial occupation treats African people like the others. Even though they got prisons where everybody can go to prison, but they treat us like the others. We don't go to prison like white people go to prison. When your child goes to prison, he's going to pick up 25, 30, 40, 50 years. That's just the way it works out all over this country. I ain't going to prison 50 years. That's the reason that a cop will die. Because the people are saying it's not going to happen that way. People are responding to occupation. In St. Petersburg, Florida, little tiny city that I live in a less than 1 month, 3 cops got killed by Africans. The last one by an African who had just turned 16 years old. 2 cops got killed by 1 African in 1 situation. And of course, the state, the police, the government, they recognize who you are even if you don't recognize who you are. They are prepared for you because they know that you are occupied, you are colonial people. So when this one brother, the 16-year-old killed his brother, when the first one got shot, they had tanks, Homeland Security tanks in the black community. Homeland Security, what the hell is that? That's supposed to be what? External threat. Isn't that what they say? Homeland Security for external threat? This brother was right there in the African community. They had tanks from Homeland Security. They had FBI agents. The next one, they had FBI, Homeland Security. They had DEA. They had tobacco and firearms. And they used the local dome there for assembly site for more military force you ever seen in your life. And within hours, they had cordoned off the entire African community. Everything black coming into that community. The cars were searched, trunks were searched, the buses were stopped and searched. Africans standing waiting for the buses were stopped. And this is before they even knew who did it. They didn't even know what the brother looked like. So obviously, looking in the car, the fact the brother who did it was walking all by. But they have a prepared process to deal with us because they recognize that we are an occupied community. And Africans are increasingly experiencing occupation and responding to occupation. Responding to occupation. It's our responsibility to bring organization and ideology to our community so people know how to deal with our oppression and exploitation in a more effective way. And the reality is that we're seeing increasingly the imperialists seem to have concluded that there's a sector of humanity, people, whose existence is not important anymore to them, and that they make plans in a fashion that ignores our existence. That's in this country, obviously, increasingly that's the case. Whoever hears of the Indians, right? Whoever hears of the Indians, right? Increasingly, the plans that get made, cuts, all kinds of attacks in the economy. They target African populations and things like that. Look at our situation in places like Colombia. Africans living in South America. Many of them are even not even conscious of our identity as African people. And the governments in those places treat us like non-entities and what have you. And this is a reality that we are increasingly going to have to deal with. And they've got an African to preside over this process that we are talking about. So this is of signal significance, I think, what we're looking at. And I just want to remind us of this, that this is not a time for despair. It truly is not a time for despair. It's a time to get busy, because our oppressor, our historical oppressor, is in big time trouble. We reject everything that they have established for us. We reject it all. We don't want any of it. We want our independence, our freedom, our liberation, and we demand the ability to create a world in our own image. That's our responsibility to do that. That's our responsibility. If you expect the imperialists to do anything for you, you got another thing coming. They are not going to do anything. That's why I was so crazy to assume that the election of Barack Obama was something that was for us. I mean, they gave him $700 million. $700 million. Anybody want to help me? They don't need to go through the middleman. That was not for us. He got more money from Wall Street than any candidate. More money from Wall Street than any candidate. What they call campaign contributions was really purchase price. And it's our responsibility to find the world as we want it to be, and to strike out and create that world. We got to make a revolution. I'll say it again. Revolution. Revolution. We have no future independent of revolution. And revolutionaries are people who are in organization. You can't be some revolutionary just running out there on your own. Revolutionaries are people who are in organization. Organization is a condition of existence for revolutionaries. So we have to be a revolution. We have to recognize that we are one African nation dispersed around the world. That our future is a collective future, not some Negro future in America, or some Negro future in Trinidad or England or some other place like that. One African future is what it is that we have to fight for. We don't have a future unless we're able to do that. Thank you, Uhuru.